Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and welcome to part 5 of our review/how-to for Kult Divinity Lost. Previous videos we've made our character Jack Morton, who we can use for reference in this video, and have covered game mechanics as well as player moves and Game Master hard and soft moves. So building on all of that, we're ready to cover character stability. And as before, this game and therefore this video series is for mature players only, and that your horror contract for your group's table should always be respected. So, what is stability? Well, stability is a measure of a player character's mental strength and condition, and can decrease as the character experiences supernatural and traumatic and horrific events. This is a lot like sanity that you would have in other games like Call of Cthulhu. But unlike those games where your sanity is like your mental hit points, and when you run out of that, your character's permanently insane and it's time to write up a new character, stability in Kult Divinity Lost works a bit different, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. Sure, there are some terrible things that can happen to you when you start running low on stability, but it's not necessarily 100% bad. It's just when your character in Kult runs out of stability, that's when things get interesting. What causes stability loss? Well, stability can be lost in several ways. Sometimes it's automatic, such as a character's relation is seriously injured. It automatically reduces a player character's stability by the relation value. If a character's relation dies, the character loses double that relation value in stability. So Jack has a relation value of 2 with his old friend Mark White. So if Mark was seriously injured, it would cost Jack 2 stability. But if Mark were to die, Jack would lose 4 stability. Automatic stability loss can also be a Game Master hard move, when something is just simply so horrifying and terrible that the Game Master feels there is no way that the player character wouldn't be affected by it, and they lose a set value of stability without even rolling for it. It gives a few examples of this, such as a monster sawing off a player character's hand with a rusting knife. That is an automatic -4 to stability, no save against it. I mean, they're being dismembered here, and that's pretty dang horrifying. Or regaining consciousness in a wrecked bus full of mangled and murdered bodies as rebel soldiers begin peppering it with automatic fire. That is a horrible and terrifying situation, and that costs 2 stability. However, Game Masters, we strongly recommend that you be a little sparing with the automatic stability loss hard moves. I mean, yeah, there are going to be some things that are so traumatic that they should warrant an automatic loss of stability. But if every time the player characters come across the supernatural or the horrible that they automatically lose stability from it, that stops being as much fun. So use your best judgment here. Which brings us into soft Game Master moves, which should be the most common type. So when a character witnesses something horrific, like a crime scene or a Lictor's true form, the player is to roll a Keep It Together, which uses their willpower attribute. So they roll their 2d10, apply their willpower score and any relevant modifiers, and total up the result. On a 15 or higher, the character grits their teeth and powers through it. On a 10 to 14, the character suffers a -1 on all rolls until they're out of this situation and can manage to collect themselves. And then the player chooses from one of the following options. They might become angry, sad, scared, or guilt-ridden and suffer a -1 to their stability score. Or instead of losing stability, they might become obsessed with whatever caused this condition, such as a particular creature that's involved with it, and they gain a +1 relation value to that creature or entity. Or they might become so distracted by what they're seeing that they're able to stop looking at it out of the corner of their eye, and that gives them a -2 to all their rolls instead of the -1. Or they might just be haunted by this event at a later time, meaning the Game Master takes 1 hold to use later on. In the event the roll is a 2 through 9, a total failure, the Game Master can have the player cower, completely powerless to act. Or the Game Master might give the player the option to flee, charge and fight recklessly, or just freeze in terror until the threat is gone. Or the Game Master might decide that the player character loses between 2 and 4 stability, just depending on whatever the severity of this trauma is. Now, one thing that is worth noting is that eventually a character can only experience so much horrible violence or seeing so many Nephrites before they just become desensitized to that particular thing, in which case they shouldn't be losing any more stability whenever they encounter it. The book acknowledges this, but it says it's up to the Game Master to determine the circumstances of when a player character no longer needs to be rolling a Keep It Together when encountering any particular type of thing.
Which does make sense, because there are so many different ways that a player character could lose stability in this game. There's not really a catch-all method that you could write out that says when they're going to be immune to any stability loss from something no more. But a good general rule of thumb that you might want to think about is, the first time they encounter some sort of, monster or go to one of the different planes or encounter some situation, treat it like normal and they could lose up to the full value of stability from that. But then the next time they come across that, whether that be the same adventure or the next adventure or 2 adventures later, maybe have it be where they're only going to lose half the amount that they would have lost if they fail any rolls, right? So instead of losing 4, they just lose 2. Instead of losing 2, they lose 1, because this is not entirely unknown to them at this point. Then the third time they come across it, you can just go ahead and say that they're probably hardened to it by now and they don't need to have any sort of in-game mechanical effect. Now, your players, they can still role-play out how this has shaken and disturbed them, but we don't need to keep track of this on the character sheets no more, because our player characters, they've gotten hardened to it. Now, in a few years, once the player characters kind of forgotten a little bit about it, right, and they've let their guard down, that's when you could eke in just a little bit more effect. Like now it's going to affect them again, because they didn't think they were going to have to deal with that again. But until then, you can just say that they're hardened to it.
Okay, so now that we've covered all the fun ways we can lose stability, let's cover what all that means in game mechanic terms. On the back of the character sheet is the stability tracker. There are 10 levels to stability, and at the beginning of the adventure, the player character is most likely going to be starting out at composed, which is the highest level. As we lose stability, we check these boxes, descending on through the categories. At moderate stress, we have a -1 to any disadvantage rolls, which in Jack's case would mean fighting his repressed memories or managing to avoid his stalker. The next tier is serious stress, giving a -2 to disadvantage rolls and a -1 to keep it together rolls, making it even harder to resist more stability loss in the future. At critical stress, these minuses increase even more. However, we also have a +1 to our see through the illusion, representing that our mind is so shaken that we can now perceive the truth of our imprisonment, how things really are around us. The final stage is broken, and here the Game Master makes a move. The book gives us several options of varying degrees of what this might mean. They can activate a character's disadvantage as a total failure, which I see as the least exciting of all of these. Or we can gain a brand new disadvantage, which, okay, that's cool. We've got a lasting effect. I do like that. Or maybe they become suicidal, which I'm just not a fan of this one. Time and space distortion and the illusion crumbling, that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. The later portion of the book goes more into detail on this, and this is when a character's shock and horror causes their forgotten divinity to flare up, temporarily breaking the illusion. They might teleport to a faraway place, maybe it's their bedroom back home, or maybe the streets of some unknown city, or a gateway rips open to another realm, pulling them and everyone around them into Metropolis or Underworld or some other realm. They might summon or even create a creature, or their body might begin warping or melting or altering because their flesh itself is an illusion and it's beginning to break down. Now, these can be permanent or they can just be temporary changes as the illusion snaps back into control and asserts itself. Or maybe subjective hours or days have passed, but all of a sudden they're just back to where they were as if nothing had happened at all. Now, what I find a little bit more interesting than that is just mixing these together, such as we could have a character roll to keep themselves from suicide or self-harm. However, instead of this being a life or death sort of situation, the character's body begins warping and melting as they're trying to fight themselves from pulling the trigger. Or maybe they do pull the trigger and there's a flash, and now all of a sudden they're standing in Metropolis, the sound of their gunshot echoing down the empty streets. Then after some time, they suddenly snap back to where they were standing before, a smoking pistol in their mouth and no sign of injury at all, and whatever the threat was is still in front of them. Now, none of these options here really do anything in the way of recovering a player character's stability, which pretty much leaves them to where they were when we started. They're broken and there's now nothing more that we can lose, goes, and it's kind of a dead end. So Game Masters, we also have these additional options of what we might do when a character reaches broken status. They might switch to attribute values with each other and regain a little bit of stability from that, or they might completely change archetypes, a fundamental shift in their character that also regains a little bit of stability, or we might just simply have gained some insight into the truth and gained an experience point as well as a little stability, which one experience point in Kult is a pretty big deal here. Personally, I prefer the idea of blending these two lists, sort of a cause and effect, the illusion crumbling, and as it reforms, the player character gains an experience and a little bit of their stability back. Or their disadvantage manifests before them, and the best way that the player character can escape it is by switching two attributes, or maybe switching whatever their archetype is altogether, as in the player character has to change themselves in order to escape this situation.
Oh yeah, and this captures the best of both. Mind-bending weirdness and horror resulting in a dramatic and sometimes beneficial change. A player character hitting broken should be dramatic and life-altering, and should always leave the player character different than they were before.
Recovering stability. Okay, so now that we've covered how one might lose stability and the risks involved with that, let's look at what a character can do in order to recover their stability. The first way is through relations. In a scene where a character and one of their relations experience closeness or assurance, the character's stability improves by whatever that relationship value is. So if they have a relationship value of 1, their stability improves by 1 step. This is roleplay, and many player characters are going to have relationship values with one another. And we might have scenes where the different PCs are talking and reminiscing and assuring each other that everything is going to be all right as a way of increasing each other's stability and their own stability. Now, this could also be done over the phone. It doesn't have to be done in person. Beyond Darkness and Madness gives one example where a character is trapped in Metropolis and they find this old rotary phone that somehow connects them back home. The character's young son picks up the phone and tells them all about their day at school and what's going on in their life as the character is sitting there listening, standing in this ruin of an ancient and alien city. And then once the call ends, having listened to their child's voice, the character's stability is raised by 2. Now, for this to happen, the players need to look for and be receptive to these opportunities in order to roleplay. And game masters also need to allow these things to happen or even set up these opportunities in order for the player characters to take advantage of them, rather than just trying to rush everything on to the next exciting scene. This is a lot like how I talked about in part 3 with dramatic hooks, how sometimes the game master just needs to let the camera keep rolling in order for the players to take the opportunity for that gap to roleplay a scene out between them where the game master isn't involved at all. Now, it never says in that example if the player character picked up the phone and they called home hoping to hear their son and maybe regain some stability through that, or if they were just walking through the streets and they heard the phone ringing inside a building and they walked in and they picked it up and their son was on the other end. Either way is a perfectly cool way of doing it, but one of those would be instigated by the player who's trying to set this up, and the other would be instigated by the game master who's trying to give that player a little bit of a way of recovering their stability. Another option that's offered in Beyond Darkness and Madness is mementos. Mementos are some item that's related to a player character's backstory and has an emotional value attached to it. I would go as far as giving them an actual mechanical value, just like relation. It's got a +1 or a +2. And like with relations, these can be used to give bonuses to keep it together rolls or increasing stability if the player character is spending some time with it and kind of remembering about whatever it was linked to and some sort of fond memory in that sense. And like with relations, if a memento is lost or destroyed, it can give the opposite effects as the character's going through the trauma of losing this valuable memento from their past. Another method of regaining stability that was introduced in the free scenario Gallery of Souls, which was the first Kult adventure that we had ever played, and in that, because it was a one-shot adventure, each of the characters' 2 dramatic hooks regained 1 point of stability when they were completed, instead of awarding 1 experience point. And I feel that's the best way of approaching this for one-shot adventures where long-term advancement isn't a factor and there's no real need for them to try to gain experience points, so we might as well make this worth some sort of stability as a benefit. Now, Kult acknowledges this in Beyond Darkness and Madness, offering this as a method as an alternate use for dramatic hooks, where some dramatic hooks might be worth experience, while some others might be used for regaining stability. Personally, I'm not opposed to having dramatic hooks, be used for both. It's completely situational, but there are times when a dramatic hook is, once it's completed, that I would give the player character 1 XP as well as some stability as a result, especially if whatever that dramatic hook was, involved them deepening their bond or their relation with one of the other characters. Okay, well that is about it for this episode, pretty short and sweet, and as you can see how stability is far more than just mental hit points that you would find as a sanity mechanic in something like Call of Cthulhu. It's a pretty cool system, and one that I feel really encourages and enhances roleplay for all the players around the table. The next episode of this series, I'm going to go over my final thoughts and overall praises and criticisms of Kult.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, or how-tos, or even more of this series on Kult Divinity Lost, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, my awakened little gods, have a great day. What I think a cool effect would be if you have a player character that got a total failure on to keep it together, or maybe they've reached that broken status, is have a dramatic shift in all of that player character's relations, like all of them. So any of the characters that are with them, right, any of the NPCs and PCs, those, they all got a +1 to their relation value because now they feel closer to them, like they went through this trauma and these horrors together, and that has bonded them closer than ever before. But meanwhile, all the relationships back home, those went down by 1 because now the player character, they don't connect with them the same way anymore because they don't know what the player character's been through. Or you could do it the other way around, and you could say that all the relationships of the people that they were with at the time that happened, those went down by 1 because now the player character, every time they look at them, they're reminded of that horrible trauma that they went through. They might even blame them for that trauma, right? Like they're guilty by association. But meanwhile, all their relations back home that weren't there at the time, those all got stronger because now the player character's rushing to them, trying to kind of bury themselves in their lives and hide from that trauma and kind of get back into the illusion. I think there's a lot of potential ways you could work with that.